fine.
Hello everybody, welcome to another edition of What's Going On. I'm your host, Tom D'Ambra. As always, we are very thankful you take the time from your busy day to watch our program. My friends, a lot going on in the world, and I know last week we talked about, I would like to get back to a little bit because we have so many new viewers, and I know sometimes I will say things that seem so abstract to the average American because they've been indoctrinated for so long through the indoctrination centers, which you call the public school systems, through the 501c3 IRS corporation churches, and through obviously the mainstream media. And I really want to get back into that. I want to dedicate some time every week, at least at one facet of it, to get back into understanding when I say something like, you don't own your land, you don't own any property, Senate Document 43. I want to review things like that so we can understand why we're in the predicament we're in, and if we have a knowledge of what took us down this road, the deception, the criminality, the collusion, it's a true conspiracy. And that will give us the ability to solve the problem. If we don't understand the problem, if we don't understand the mechanisms to create the equations to get the end result of remedy, we're just going to continue down this terrible rabbit hole of authoritarianism, of debt, of frustration, of never getting ahead, of continuing to bond our children, of continuing to have a medical industry. Speaking of medical industry, I read a very interesting statistic. Before Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, most premiums have gone up by over 200%. We've read that to you verbatim. The profit of the insurance companies prior to Obamacare was about $5 billion, give or take a couple of $100 million either side of that $5 billion equation. Since the ACA, Affordable Care Act, Obamacare has come into play, the profits of these same insurance companies are now over $16 billion. Think of that. The average premium has gone up by over $200. The coverages come down. And we have death panels. And I know Bill Gates said publicly that we're not to have that conversation publicly. But we have death panels. And what do I mean by death panels? What I mean by death panels is everything is a score. Let's say you're an elderly, whatever gender, male, female, and you have some detrimental pertinent medical history. Let's just say you have a cardiac history. You've had an MI, a heart attack in the past, you're on statin drugs, the whole 9 yards, whatever. And let's just say that very same person breaks their hip, falls down and breaks their hip. Well, for that person has to qualify whether or not that hip is going to be corrected. Because it's a score. This person would have their age going against them. This person would have their pertinent past medical history going against them. And it's all a score. And the other end of this is your doctor cannot just say, well, I want to run this conjure of tests. Your doctor has to go to the guidelines for such signs and symptoms, and this is what this doctor is allowed to run tests on. They're death panels. So that's just one small aspect, yet very important, as to the control that has been put in place by these bankers. as I've said to you before, and I have read this to you verbatim, that the AMA, the American Medical Association, was set up and is a Rockefeller Foundation. It was put into place to control medicine in this country. On the way into the studio this morning, Stanley and I were discussing about this new bill that hasn't hit the floor yet at the federal level, but it went through committee, where if you want to get vitamin C or D or whatever, any kind of vitamins or minerals or herb supplements, if this bill makes it to the floor, it's in committee right now, folks, you're going to have to get a prescription to get a bottle of vitamin C. Now, also in this bill, they're going to regulate, if it passes, if it gets to the floor, they're going to regulate things like vitamin D. Because after all, vitamin D is incredibly good for your immune system, and the only way that we produce it is through the eyes with sunshine. So a lot of people take, and rightfully so, vitamin D supplements. I happen to be one of them, because it's so vital to the immune system. But in this bill, they want to regulate vitamin D. And what is their answer? You guessed it. More flu shots, more vaccinations. So you have to understand that this is a web. And a web does what? It deceives, because you don't really see it. The insects fly right into it. And it captures you. And then it molds you. And it entwines you to be used and consumed by the person or the thing or the entities that formed the web. And that's what this is, my friends. Everything, they have completely encompassed our society. And they've done it at the three main aspects of a society: spirituality, education, and the medium of exchange system. And that's where we're going to start. We are going to start right there. I am going to talk to you at the end of the program about the need for prayer for our nation. But what we have to understand is who is waging the war against the American people, and what are the tools, what are the mechanisms of this warfare that are being waged against us, both asymmetrical and symmetrical. So let's get into that a little bit. Now listen to this. This is from a Federal Reserve cover-up group site. And listen to this. Now this is from the Congressional Record. The Federal Reserve is neither truly federal nor a reserve. It is not owned or directly controlled by the United States government. The fact that the words United States Federal Reserve System are printed on every U.S. bank note thus raises serious questions. Okay, I'm going to stop right there. And if you want to go through the rest of this, and I'm going to read some more of this, it's called, the website is whattoknow.info. So let's back up this statement from the Congressional Record. The Federal Reserve is neither federal nor a reserve. Hence, why the name? Well, the name was put in deceitfully by the father, if you would, of the central private-controlled, privately owned, for-profit banking system, Federal Reserve. You see, when the bankers met in 1910 in Jekyll Island, Georgia, they met secretly. When they took separate trains, they didn't speak to each other, and if there was any communication at all, they used phony first names only. And the liaison between all these bankers was a senator from Rhode Island, of course, named Senator Aldrich, who wound up marrying into the Rockefeller family, as in David Aldrich Rockefeller. And anyway, he wound up being a liaison between all these crooked bankers. And we've read to you before the banks that were involved, and I'm just being real brief here. In future shows, we're going to get back into the meat and potatoes of all this. But I'm just giving you a broad brush so people, when they watch this program, will understand, well, what does this guy mean I don't own my land? What does this guy mean I bonded my children? What does this guy mean we don't have money? The Federal Reserve name was put in deceitfully by Paul Warburg because they wanted the American people to believe, number one, it was part of the federal government. So indirectly, through representation, they thought the American people would assume they would have some sort of control over it. They also had to get by the constitutionality because Article 1, Section 8 clearly states in the Constitution that the Congress will issue the currency, the medium of exchange, and the Coinage Acts of 1789 particularly state what a dollar is. A dollar is 25.8 grains of gold and in a 15-to-1 ratio of silver. So my friends, I ask you, do you have any gold or any silver backing your medium of exchange? No. All the gold and silver was taken at the duress of gunpoint or prison time or monetary fines on March 9th, 1933. And the other part of this equation with the name is reserve, Federal Reserve. So they thought they'd get the American people to believe it was part of the federal government. They knew their whole goal was to confiscate the intrinsic wealth of our nation, and they sowed the seed that it's going to go into a reserve for you because we're so kind. We're so benevolent to the American people. We're going to forcefully take your gold and silver and put it away for you because you're a hoarder. Them were the words that were used. The hoarders. Well, who's the hoarders? Who took all the gold and silver? And let's not forget, my friends, that an ounce of gold at that point on March 9, 1933 was worth $25. Once they confiscated all the wealth in less than 120 days, they bumped that benchmark to $35. They bumped it up by 40% in 120 days. Think of the wealth they assumed. So what do we have? This statement from the Congressional Record says we have bank notes. What is a note, my friends? A note is an acknowledgement of debt. That's why there are two signatories on that instrument. One is the creditor, one is the debtor, and we are the co-surety to that debt. And you may be asking yourself, Tom, why is there debt to our money? I will tell you right off, because we do not have money. Remember we read Black's Law Dictionary to you many, many times. Money does not encompass debt or notes. Remember we read that to you many times, and we're going to do it again in the future. So when I say to you, my friends, we don't have a money system or a lack of money system, by the true definition of money, we do not have money. We merely have a debt note scribed instrument for a medium of exchange, but there's no money. because we have bank notes. So you may ask, well, where does the debt come in? And we read this to you verbatim in the money mechanics document. And we're going to do that again. How the debt works, my friends, is this. For every Federal Reserve note that is issued into circulation, there is nothing backing that. The Federal Reserve is not taking an ounce of gold or an ounce of silver and putting it in away as an asset to cover that monetary note. Because if there was an ounce of gold or an ounce of silver, we would have true dollars. We would have silver certificates or gold certificates as issued by President Kennedy when he did when he was allowed to do a partial audit of Fort Knox and discovered there was no gold and discovered that there was some silver, and he issued silver certificates. So what's the difference? The silver certificate was issued by the United States Treasury. There was an ounce of silver on hold in a vault, physical possession, to back that intrinsic value of that certificate. What is the Federal Reserve note? The Federal Reserve note is ledger entries. The Federal Reserve note is nothing more than a private bank that has consumed, usurped all of the intrinsic wealth, all of the real wealth of a nation. And it could be the United States, it could be Canada, it could be anywhere in Europe. Anywhere you see these banks, these countries collapsing from debt, understand one thing. Well, look at the pigs. Portugal, Ireland, Italy, Greece, and Spain. All collapsing. All of them. Collapsing. Venezuela, collapsing. Brazil, collapsing. So, is there any historical background to these nations, whether it be culture, whether it be food, whether it be military history, whether it be geography, whether it be any imaginable correlation to each other? Well, you got some countries that are in Europe, you got some countries that are in the Med, you got some countries in North America, you got some countries in South America. So it's not geography. And it's certainly not culture. The culture in Europe and the culture in the Med and the culture in North America and the culture in South America are all different. It's not historical conquest. The only common denominator, my friends, of all these countries that are crashing is this. They are all controlled by a private central bank. Amschel Rothschild. Give me control of a nation's currency, and I care not who makes its laws. So why is this? How is it that we wound up going from a gold-backed, silver-backed, constitutional, authorized money system to a indebted lack of money system? So now you know what I mean by a lack of money system. Because the system that we have currently has no money. There is no intrinsic value. It's unconstitutional. Every congressman should be held accountable because they're neglecting their assigned duties that they took an oath to uphold. And I know, I laugh at that too. People are being prosecuted in courtrooms for mentioning the Constitution. People are being prosecuted in courtrooms for actions to promote the Constitution. Our education system teaches more about the UN Charter than it does about the American Constitution. So where does the debt come from, my friends? It's not just that these bloated politicians, you ever break that word down, politician? Poly is Latin for many of, like polypropylene. A tick is a blood-sucking organism. Politician. Many blood-sucking organisms. So where does the debt come from? The debt comes from every time the Federal Reserve, private for-profit banking corporation, gives the insolvent USA Incorporated permission to print more Federal Reserve notes, there is an interest bond due on each and every one of them. Why? Because we're using the script of a private for-profit bank, not the United States government. President Lincoln issued a thing called greenbacks. JFK, President Kennedy, issued silver certificates. They both understood the battle that was going on. Abraham Lincoln, in his memoirs, said, I have the Confederate Army in my front door. I have the international bankers in my back door. For the sake of my nation, it is the international bankers I fear the most. Thomas Jefferson. I truly believe that banking institutions are more of a threat to our liberties than standing armies. So then you may ask yourself, well, wait a minute, Tom. How did this happen? How did a private bank take over the issuance of the United States government? How did this debt, how did they sign off on this? They signed off on this with the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. Understand this, my friends. It was signed into act on December 23rd, 1913, while the Congress was away for the Christmas break. Because there were criminals in Congress. See, not much has changed because Congress is basically loaded with criminals today. That did not officially adjourn before they left for the holiday break. So these snakes put in the Federal Reserve Act. President Wilson, one of the biggest snakes we've ever had as president, signed it in before the Congress even came back. They weren't even aware of it. They were not even aware of it. Think of that. The Congress was not even aware of the takeover of our money system until it was put into play. And it was put in for a 100-year term. 100-year term. So what happened on December 23rd, 2013? And we read this to you on this program, and we screamed about it and said, this is our opportunity. Call your congressmen, call your senators, call your representatives. Write a letter to the editor. Let everybody know this is our opportunity because the term has expired. We need to not renew this contract. What did the Congress critters do? The same criminals that were involved in 1913, the same criminals that were involved in 2013, extended the Federal Reserve Act. Not a word in the mainstream media. Not a peep in the mainstream media. So understand, when they get permission to print one Federal Reserve note, understand there is an interest bond due on that initial one. So then what happens is, well, now we have to print another one to cover the interest on the initial one. Well, what just happened, folks? What just happened? Now we've got to cover the debt on the two that we printed to cover the initial one, which quadruples the debt. Do you see my point? It's perpetual debt. It was meant to be that way. We read it verbatim to you. Verbatim to you. The 6 acts they wanted to accomplish, the 6 actions, I should say, they wanted to accomplish with the Federal Reserve Act, and one of them was to have perpetual debt. What was the last one, my friends? The last one was, when the system fails, and we read this to you verbatim, when the system fails to transfer the liability to the American people. Have they done that? Absolutely. Absolutely. So next you may be saying, well, how did I become a co-surety for this debt? I didn't sign anything. I certainly don't get anything from it. Remember the document that we read to you, Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars? And do you remember we read one section of that? We read the whole thing to you, but we read one section where in this document, it said, this was from 1954, it said that we will know when the American people are ripe for the picking when there is no reciprocal relationship with the government. Is there any reciprocal relationship with the government for the American people right now? Your average tax rate, if you want to consolidate all the tax rates, all the fees, everything we pay, is about 62% right now. What do you get for that, folks? You get chaos, indoctrination systems, medical systems that promote disease and not healing. You get churches that answer to their God, and their God is just what Henry Kissinger said. It's not the God of the Creator. It's gun, oils, and drugs. That was Henry Kissinger's God. The churches, my friends, they don't want you to understand the true message of Jesus. They don't want you to understand things like the power of prayer. Do you know there is a woman, very, very brilliant woman, that put a team of scientists and professors together, and her name is Sheila Selinsky, and I know we've covered this before. But she was involved in research on spectrum weapons of kinetic energy. Kinetic, in motion. That's what kinetic means. Kinetic energy is energy in motion. You get in a car crash, and even though the car is stopped, you're still going forward. Well, that's the kinetic energy. And the days of bullets, are pretty much over. Warfare is getting to the point now of EMP warfare and kinetic energy and spectrum weapons. Well, this very intelligent woman who is very versed in these energies and these weapons decided that she would do research about, is there any spectrum or kinetic energy when we pray? Or can our thoughts manifest energy? Can we really have telepathy? Or is that just a facade? When we pray, is there an energy that is being put out? And she discovered, much to her surprise, that there is, in fact, a tremendous amount of energy that is put out, spectrum energy, when we pray. It's just science confirming what mankind has known since creation. You didn't read about that in the mainstream media, I'm sure. one quick example of the churches. That's just one. So where is the reciprocal relationship with the American people and the insolvent corporation USA, Inc.? There isn't one, my friends. There isn't one. The American people are ripe for the picking. And they're being picked every moment of every day. 62% tax rates, all together with fees, everything included. A reduction of purchasing power, which is now about 2 cents as compared to when the Federal Reserve Act was put in 1913. So you see, my friends, that's the true definition of inflation. We all hear, oh, inflation is high, inflation is high. Well, what is inflation? Inflation is the loss of purchasing power by a medium of exchange. In other words, that Federal Reserve note in your pocket doesn't buy what it could buy, say, even last year. Never mind, it's lost 98% of its purchasing power since 1913. Why is that? How is it that the Federal Reserve note has lost so much purchasing power? 98%, literally. And you're working harder to get it and being taxed more. After it goes through the siphons of the government, there's not much left for you, is there? And yet the government is $21 trillion in debt, and depending who you believe for estimates from obligatory debt, anywhere from 70 to 114 trillion dollars in obligatory debt. Why? Because all these funds have been raped. They've been taken. Lyndon Baines Johnson was the first president to take money out of the Social Security Fund, 1964. So you have a medium of exchange in your pocket that is controlled by a foreign for-profit banking corporation, which was put in under the guise of night, if you would, which has increased the debt, which is perpetual debt. As I just explained to you, we can't get out of this. Because if you print one to cover the initial liability, now you've doubled the liability. You print 4 to cover the 2, now you've quadrupled the liability, so forth and so forth. So, how did we become, as a people, enslaved by debt? And we are. A slave and a free man are very abstract entities, my friends. A slave acts upon the bequest of others. A slave does not own property. A slave, in the standing of law, does not have standing at all. A free man has intrinsic valued currency. A freeman owns and controls his property. A free man has the standing of a free man in law. He is sovereign. Where are we as a people? Just taking that small defined equation of slave and freeman. Do you own your land? No. You are merely a tenant in common, or a joint tenant. You have a certificate of title for your property, your car, and your children, don't you? You have a birth certificate, bearer use of. Someone is allowing you to use something of value. Certificate. A certificate is a secured instrument. and we read this to you verbatim. What is a secured instrument? It is an instrument that has retained some form of wealth. It's negotiable. It has wealth. You have a certificate of title for your land, for your car, for everything. Bearer use of. Someone's allowing you to use that entity, whatever it may be, but you're not the owner. Freemen would have allodial title. Allodial is Latin for absolute. You would be the owner. You would have control. You would not be paying property taxes for an indoctrination system. You would be paying taxes for municipal work and so forth. You would not have to have their inspectors and assessors come on your property, and you have no remedy to stop them. Why? Because you don't own the land. You don't own your home. And I'm not talking about a mortgage. I'm just talking about flat out ownership or not. I love it. People say, oh, I paid off my mortgage. I have clear title. No, you don't. What, you think you're the owner? Go ahead and don't pay your property taxes for 1 year, and you're going to find out who the owner is. Go ahead and don't let their assessors or inspectors come on your property, and they will come with the people with the big guns, and you're going to find out who owns your property. You don't even have the right to travel. You know, when I was a kid, of course, when I was young, you know, World War II was 13 years previous to me being a young child. And I remember as a kid, there was like a thing that used to go around, you know, your papers, please, your papers, please. Well, they were imitating and sort of laughing at, sadly, what the people of Germany went through. Because that was an unbelievable concept, that you would have to have a state ID. You got your papers today, don't you, folks? What's the difference between you and what the poor German people went through? State of Vermont. I got my license. License to be given permission which otherwise would be unpermissionable. A license comes from French law. And then, of course, all of this quagmire is wrapped in codes. Codes. IRS code, traffic code, Uniform Code of Military Justice, so forth and so forth and so forth. Well, you think about the word code. The word code, my friends, comes from the Latin word coda. Coda. To be altered secretly. Coda. To be altered secretly. Why? Because all the language has been altered. All of it. You know, we got to crack the code. We got to crack the code. We got to get the enemy's code. Why? Because their language has been altered secretly. We got to crack the code. We cracked the Japanese Purple Code 6 months before Pearl Harbor. We knew where the fleets were leaving from, Hiroshima, Tokyo. We knew their rendezvous points, and we had it within 96 hours of when they were going to attack. The Japanese Purple Code. Language is altered secretly. Traffic code. What's a driver? I'm going to give you an example. What is a driver, my friends? A driver is one who engages on public roads for commercial use. Hence, you needed a license to pay road usage taxes because you were profiting from the use of the public roads. That should also tell you another thing. If you are in commercial activities, you are under what type of law? Law mercantile, commercial law. What are we under? Commercial law, mercantile law. So then they made it mandatory. See, we're only going to have these licenses for people who are profiting off of your roads. Oh, okay, that sounds good. I'm with that. 29 years later, bingo, everybody has to have a license now to do a very basic thing of travel. That's just one example. So, when I say to you, my friends, you don't own your land, and you're probably asking, well, gee, Tom, how is it I don't own my land? Well, you don't own your land because of Senate Document 43. Now, Senate Document 43 took place in 1933, March 9, 1933, when the Corporation USA Incorporated, what you know as the federal government, went insolvent to another corporation, you guessed it, the Federal Reserve Bank. The United States government at all levels consists of just over 35,000 corporations. And we have read this to you verbatim. I haven't even got into any of the news about, what the bankers are doing over here, what the bankers are doing here, what the bankers are doing here. I haven't even got into this today. Matter of fact, I'm not going to. Because we don't have to see what they're doing now to see where their end game is, because we can see what they've been doing for the last 104 years to our nation. These bankers profit from debt. They profit from the debt without even any risk to them. All they merely do is make ledger entries. Just like your bank. When you take out a loan or a mortgage, another French word, mortgage, death pledge. Look that up. We have read that to you verbatim. I got to go. My loved one is at the morgue. Death pledge, mortgage. When you take out a mortgage or an automobile loan, whichever, I know what you think. You think, oh, the bank is going to take X amount of money, going to put it into this account, and now, okay, they're going to take that money and put it out to cut me that check, and I can go buy my car. No. No. We read to you verbatim where banks have a 4%. And I think, I know it might have got reduced last year, but what I know of is 4% liability ratio. And what does that mean? That means for every dollar that you borrow, they only have to have 4 cents put away to cover their debt ratio. So you say, well, Deanne, brother, then how the heck are they issuing me this check? You made a promise to pay, didn't you? What is our lack of money system? Now that you understand why I say that. It's debt. It's based on debt. So you promised to pay X amount a month at this term, at this interest rate, and you put up the vehicle as a collateral. So the bank takes your promise to pay, puts it in their ledger as an asset because you promised to pay, and now that's magically turned into an asset, and they cut you a check with your promise to pay. That's how it works. Think of that. And the Federal Reserve has even fine-tuned it better. They don't have to have any backup. All they got to do is, not even the 4%, all they got to do is just have a mere ledger entry. That's it. We gave you permission. Here you go. Now you owe us. How does that work? Why is it that way? Because Congress is nothing but a bunch of criminals. You know, can you imagine the money that is made under the table by these people? Never mind the $185,000 a year. All you got to do is get elected and you got a life pension plan. How come they don't have the same medical pension plans that we have? Why? Because ours, they robbed all of ours. Ours are going to fail. Ours have failed. As a matter of fact, as we reported to you some time ago, Obama took $198 billion and put it from Freddie Mae and Freddie Mac and put it into the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, because it was ready to implode. How do you think they're going to make up that $1.98, folks? Huh? You got it. You're going to make it up. So when I say to you lack of money system, my friends, this is what I'm talking about. I don't use these terms to be flamboyant and get you to watch this show. I'll be honest with you, this show is a symptom of the conditioning and the misinformation, disinformation, dumbing down, and apathy of the American people, because we need shows like this. Understand you own nothing. Understand you're a debtor in a commercial law system. Understand your education in your churches, your medical associations, and all the rest of it are controlled by private organizations or foreign organizations like UNESCO, United Nations Education, Scientific, Cultural Organization, and others. Your judicial system is controlled by a foreign guild called the Bar, British Accreditation Registry. Hence why attorneys to attorn, to separate one from one's property, are called esquires, a title of British nobility. Everything that all the people sacrificed, all the blood, all the anguish, all the pain, all the horror has gone for naught because we have lost our nation, our watch. We are responsible. The founding fathers and all the sacrifices made by so many people, they must be crying, looking down at what we've allowed to happen and what these bankers have accomplished. Folks, we're in deep trouble. Real, serious trouble. And I'm afraid President Trump is not being completely upfront with the American people, because maybe he understands, if the American people ever understand the state of our affairs, maybe Henry Ford was right. It is well the American people do not understand our banking and money system, for if they did, I fear there'd be revolution by morning. Henry Ford, 1931. So the only way we're going to get out of this debt, my friends, is to try and accomplish getting out of the clutches of these foreign bankers of the Federal Reserve. It's the only way. Because we are in a situation of perpetual debt, as I've explained to you. There's no way of getting out of it with this current system. It was designed that way, my friends. They have usurped the wealth of our nation. They have usurped the school systems, the medical systems, the churches, the media, the AP, the UPI. Who the hell put the AP and the UPI together? Morgan and his cronies, J.P. Morgan and his cronies, 1924 on. We read all this to you. Why did they do that? To consolidate information. Why did they take over the school system in 1964? To consolidate knowledge, to control the agenda. What was it Bertrand Russell said? And I'm paraphrasing. That the mission of the school systems was to make the student in life not be able to act or think on his own reconnaissance, but to think and act as his schoolmasters would have desired. Well, they've done that. Look at these snowflakes. They have cry-ins. Cry-ins. Because no one loses anymore, you see, my friends? Everybody gets a trophy. There's no more losers. No, everybody loses. When you don't know how to, when you get knocked down and you don't know how to get up on your feet and get up to that plate and take another swing at the ball, you've lost. You're a loser in the true sense of the word, but you're a winner when you dust off your pants, you walk up to that plate and you say, go ahead, give me another one because I'm going to whack this thing out of the ballpark. That makes you a winner. The pedophilia that these people are involved with, as we've touched on with you, is absolutely disgusting. Over 10,000 arrests now throughout the world. As we reported to you, they have found children in cages being transported. And who was part of this? DynCorp, United States government, Clinton Foundation. All of these people, they're all involved with it. From academia to the justice to all of it. They're all involved with it. Why? Because they're sick, satanic, depraved beings. And they also what? They're compromised. They're compromised. How did Dennis Hastings go from a wrestling coach to Speaker of the House in such a short time? Well, he was diddling children for decades. They know it. They put him in power. Why? Because he was completely compromised. Barney Frank, they caught him running an underage brothel out of his congressional office. Did he go to prison? No. What'd they do? They made him chairman of the Banking and Currency Committee. Why? Because he was compromised. So, my friends, I apologize for not getting into this, but you know what? This is just another chapter. All these things are just another chapter of these bankers manipulating everything from the Libra to the education to the medical to the money system, or lack of. So how are you a co-surety? I'm running out of time, I'm sorry. You are a co-surety, my friends, because you were bonded. You are bonded with a birth certificate. I have brought in mine. I have shown you. I was born 11/10/58. I was bonded by the Midwest Bank Note Company 11/12/58. Hence, in a commercial law system, you are either a creditor or a debtor. I am bonded, my friends. I am a debtor. I am bonded. I am chattel. Chattel, movable property which has been liened. I, you, we, as a nation, are all chattel. We have been bonded. We have been liened. That is the state of our lack of money system. So when you hear me say lack of money system, my friends, you'll understand money does not encompass debt. That medium of exchange in your pocket, which has lost 98% of its purchasing power since the private Federal Reserve for-profit banking corporation took over our lack of money system, we are nothing more than chattel. And President Trump has got a long way to go to educate the American people so we can get out of the clutches of these avarice people. My friends, we're very thankful you took the time from your busy day to watch our program. We always close in asking you to seek truth, obtain knowledge, and manifest kindness to your fellow man. And we always close in reminding you that your government is your responsibility. We thank you for watching.
read between the lines. Got to read between the lines. Well, the truth is very simple, very hard to find.